The rain hammered against the windows of Rosie's diner like angry fists, each drop seeming to echo the desperation in Maria Santos's heart. She stood behind the counter, her worn apron damp with sweat and worry, watching the clock tick past midnight. Her shift had ended an hour ago, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Not tonight. Not when tomorrow would bring the eviction notice that would seal her family's fate. Maria had been a waitress at Rosie's for 8 years, ever since her husband Carlos had his accident at the construction site. What started as temporary work to help with medical bills had become their lifeline when Carlos could no longer work. His back injury had stolen more than his job, it had stolen his confidence, his smile, and slowly, his will to keep fighting. The bell above the door chimed, and Maria looked up to see an elderly couple shuffling in from the storm. The man supported his wife's arm as she moved carefully, each step deliberate and measured. They were both soaked to the bone, their clothes clinging to their thin frames. The woman's hands shook as she clutched a small purse, and Maria noticed the man's shoes had holes that let in the rain. Most of the diner's customers were long gone by this hour, leaving only the hum of the coffee machine and the distant sound of the dishwasher in the kitchen. Maria approached the couple with a warm smile, despite the weight crushing her chest. "Good evening, folks. Terrible night to be out in this weather. Let me get you somewhere warm and dry." She guided them to a booth near the heater, noticing how they seemed to study the menu with unusual intensity. The woman, who introduced herself as Eleanor, kept glancing at the prices with worried eyes. Her husband Frank fidgeted with his wallet, opening and closing it repeatedly. "We were wondering," Eleanor began hesitantly, "if you might have anything for about $12. We haven't eaten since breakfast and our bus broke down about 5 miles from here." Maria's heart clenched. She recognized the look in their eyes, the same look she saw in her own mirror every morning. It was the look of people trying to maintain dignity while their world crumbled around them. Without hesitation, she made a decision that would change everything. "You know what? Tonight's your lucky night. The cook made way too much pot roast, and if we don't serve it, it'll just go to waste. How does pot roast with mashed potatoes, green beans, and fresh dinner rolls sound? On the house, of course." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Oh dear, we couldn't possibly accept charity. We have our pride." "It's not charity," Maria said gently. "It's good business sense. Can't have food going to waste when there are good people who could enjoy it." Frank squeezed his wife's hand and nodded gratefully. "We're traveling to see our son in Oregon. He's been sick and we're all the family he has left. The bus fare took everything we had saved." Maria served them the most generous portions she could manage, adding extra rolls and a slice of apple pie she claimed was also going to waste. As they ate, Eleanor shared that they had been married for 52 years, that Frank had worked as a school janitor until his arthritis forced him to retire, and that their son David was fighting cancer alone because he didn't want to burden his elderly parents. What they didn't know was that Maria understood their struggle more intimately than they could imagine. As she refilled their coffee cups, her mind wandered to her own son Miguel, only 15 but already working after school to help the family. She thought of her daughter Sophia, who had given up her dreams of college to work at the local grocery store. Her children were sacrificing their futures for a present that seemed increasingly hopeless. When the couple finished their meal, Frank insisted on paying for their coffee at least. Maria accepted the $2 they placed on the table, knowing it was important for their dignity. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor grasped Maria's hands. "You have no idea what this meant to us tonight. There are angels walking among us, and you're one of them." After they left, Maria sat in the empty diner and cried. She cried for Frank and Eleanor, for her own family struggles, and for all the people trying to hold their lives together with nothing but determination and hope. She opened the register and put in $28 of her own tip money to cover their meal, knowing it meant her own family would have even less this week. 3 weeks later, Maria was serving the breakfast rush when a young man in an expensive suit walked in. He looked around the diner with curious eyes before approaching her station. "Excuse me, "Are you Maria Santos?" Her heart skipped. Was this about the eviction? Had something happened to Carlos or the kids? "My name is David Patterson. I think you served my parents a few weeks ago." "Frank and Eleanor Patterson?" Maria's hand flew to her chest. "Your parents? How are they? Are they all right?" David's eyes filled with emotion. "They're wonderful, thanks to you. But there's something you need to know. Something they didn't tell you that night." He gestured toward a booth, and Maria saw Frank and Eleanor sitting there, beaming at her with tears in their eyes. Her legs nearly gave out as she rushed over to embrace them. David sat down across from Maria, his voice gentle but urgent. "My parents told me about your kindness that night. How you fed them when they had nothing. How you made them feel human when the world had stripped away their dignity." Maria shook her head. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," David said firmly. "Anyone wouldn't have done what you did. And here's what they didn't tell you that night because they were too proud: my parents aren't just traveling to see their sick son. I'm their sick son, and I'm also the CEO of Patterson Industries. We manufacture medical equipment, and last month we went public." Maria stared at him in confusion. "I don't understand. When my parents called to tell me about the angel who had shown them such kindness, I knew I had to find you. I had private investigators track down every Maria Santos who worked at a diner along their route. And when I found out about your family's situation, about your husband's injury and your children's sacrifices, I knew exactly what I needed to do." David pulled out an envelope and placed it on the table. Inside was a check that made Maria's vision blur. But there was more. "My company is opening a new distribution center right here in town. It will employ over 200 people at wages that can actually support families. I want your husband Carlos to head our facilities maintenance department. The job comes with full medical benefits and a signing bonus that should take care of any immediate financial concerns." Maria couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. The number on the check was more money than her family had ever seen. "But there's one condition," David continued with a smile. "I want you to be our employee relations coordinator. Your job would be to identify team members who are struggling and connect them with resources. Because someone who would sacrifice their own family's grocery money to feed strangers is exactly the kind of person we need looking out for our employees." Eleanor reached across the table and took Maria's trembling hands. "You gave us more than a meal that night, dear one. You gave us hope when we had none. You reminded us that goodness still exists in this world." Frank nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "We raised our son to never forget where he came from and to always pay kindness forward. What you did that night reminded us both why that matters." Through her tears, Maria managed to whisper, "Thank you. But I still don't understand. Why me? Why all of this?" David leaned forward. "Because kindness isn't just something nice we do for others. It's the foundation that holds our humanity together. When my parents called me that night, something in their voices had changed. For months, they'd sounded defeated by my illness, by their financial struggles, by feeling like burdens. But after meeting you, they sounded like themselves again. Like people who mattered. Like people with hope." 6 months later, the new Patterson Industries facility held its grand opening. Maria stood beside Carlos, who looked stronger and more confident than he had in years. Miguel was there too, having received a full scholarship to study engineering, a program David had quietly arranged. Sophia had enrolled in community college, her tuition covered by the company's education benefit program. As Maria watched the ribbon-cutting ceremony, she thought about that rainy night when desperation had filled her heart. She had given away $28 she couldn't afford to lose, believing she was simply doing what felt right. She never could have imagined that her act of kindness would not only transform her own life but create opportunities for an entire community. Eleanor appeared beside her, now looking healthy and vibrant. She had been receiving treatment at the best cancer center in the state, with David's full recovery serving as proof that miracles still happened. You know what the most beautiful part of this story is? Eleanor asked, squeezing Maria's arm. Maria shook her head, still overwhelmed by the magnitude of how their lives had changed. The most beautiful part is that you didn't help us that night because you thought we were wealthy or connected. You helped us because your heart wouldn't let you do anything else. You saw two struggling people and responded with pure kindness. That's the kind of goodness that changes the world, one person at a time. As Maria looked around at the faces of her new colleagues, her healed family, and the community that would benefit from the jobs David had brought to their town, she understood something profound. Kindness isn't just something we give, it's something that multiplies, creating ripples that extend far beyond anything we can imagine. That night, when Maria tucked her children into beds in their new home, she whispered a prayer of gratitude. Not just for their financial security or Carlos's recovery, but for the reminder that in a world that often feels cold and disconnected, acts of simple human kindness still have the power to transform lives in ways we never expect. Sometimes, the smallest gestures carry the greatest power. Sometimes, paying for a stranger's meal isn't just about the money, it's about preserving the dignity, hope, and humanity that connect us all. This story reminds us that kindness is never wasted. Every act of compassion, no matter how small, has the potential to change lives in ways we may never know. If Maria's story touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that good people still exist in this world. Subscribe to Pure Kindness Stories for more inspiring tales that celebrate the best of human nature. Because in a world that often focuses on what divides us, we choose to shine a light on what brings us together: our shared capacity for love, compassion, and extraordinary kindness.